Legendary innovator and marketer and business leader Steve Jobs, on his deathbed, had mentioned his regret about not being a better father. Oftentimes, the greatest successes in life can't compensate for failure in the home. I'm so excited for you to listen to this interview with Tony Gillard, who he and I are going to be talking about the journey of fatherhood, what we've learned, and some really unique perspectives that Tony has, having had a child that's gone through 4 open heart surgeries, and just what that's taught him. So tune in. This episode is one you don't want to miss. So the big question is this: how do those of us with crazy amounts of ambition, how do we think bigger than the building of our own empires? How do we simultaneously seek success and significance, income and impact? My name is Justin Stoddard, and welcome to the Think Bigger Mastermind. Hey, so excited to be here with my friend and colleague in this industry, Tony Gillard. What's up, Tony?
Hey, Justin, how you doing? Thanks for having me here.
Of course. Tony and I, it's funny, our relationship, when we first met each other, we didn't like each other. Remember that?
I remember.
The funny story, but to summarize it, I realized Tony was super bright, and I was threatened by him, and I was like, crap, this guy's smarter than me, dang it. And then quickly I realized, like, hey, I don't have to compete with him. We aren't even in the same industry directly. Let's just partner together, do stuff together. So anyway, it's been super fun to work together, and I continue to learn from this guy all the time. And today we're going to be learning about a different topic that's not has nothing business related, right? Which is probably more of what you and I are really about.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. The fewer people know. I think people know this about us.
Yeah.
They don't get a chance to hear us really talk about it, which is our favorite role, which is that of being dad.
Yes.
And you may be watching this in and around Father's Day, or maybe at some later time, but for us, we're on the cusp of Father's Day. And so we get to talk about this cool role that we get to play, this great privilege we get to play of being father. So the reason why I think Tony is a great person to have me interview on this topic is that he's had a really interesting journey being a father. He has a son, Isaac, who is one of the most amazing people you'll ever meet, who's had 4 open heart surgeries. And those open heart surgeries came at very young ages and throughout his childhood. And it caused Tony to look at fatherhood very differently. And both with Isaac as well as his other 2 great kids. So we're going to talk a little bit about that experience. And then we're going to talk a little bit about just the impact that being a father has been to us. Hoping to inspire and impact other men out there to step up and be the kind of dads that we want to be, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think in some ways that we inadvertently model for our children, right? Yeah. I think that's something that's become more front and center for me is now that I have one that's moved out, is that a lot of the things that I did as a dad is going to impact my son as a future dad.
Right.
And that's kind of a bigger deal than maybe I had paid attention to before. And now it's like very, very front and center for my thought.
Yeah. It's interesting. I heard a statistic that somewhere around 90% of the people that are incarcerated didn't have an active father in their life.
Wow.
In the home.
Wow. That's incredible.
So you look at the statistics of just how important it is to have a father figure. Now I'm sure there's some that didn't have a father in the home and they turned out great, and there's probably some in our audience that are like that. But there's definitely a direct correlation to having a stable home and having kids do great things and be good active citizens in the world. And I know for me, having a great dad in my home and in my life continues to impact me today. Like you said, the way that I father has a lot to do with the model that my father was for me.
Nice. I honestly didn't have that history or experience. In fact, that's one of the bigger blessings that I'm thankful for, is that I didn't turn out like my real father.
Wow.
My real father kind of vacated the scene early on and never really reached back out.
Wow. Even to this day.
Yeah, he's passed, and I tried to reconnect with him when he was sick and kind of nearing the end, hoping, just for a last chance, at a relationship, if there could be one, and it was still very distant, and it's something that I can't fathom you know, having
Yeah.
3 of my own, and I mean, I can't even imagine not putting them to bed at night,
Yeah.
every single night, you know.
Mhm.
So a blessing for sure to have whatever within me didn't come from modeling,
Yeah.
was just innately there, maybe. I don't know. Obviously, having friends, having people I look up to be good dads, and to see that has been a positive impact as well. But I think, you know, for your experience, I love hearing that, because that's what I want to be for my kiddos. You know, I want them, maybe even after I've passed, to be looking back fondly on some of their character traits and think, well, that was because of some of the things my dad did.
Yeah. But encourage those that are listening to think about the role that your dad played, and whatever that was, whether it was positive or whether it was negligent or not really a part of it. Hopefully some intentionality creeps in there for you to say, I want to be like my dad in these areas. I don't want to be like him in these areas, or I don't want to be like him at all. I want to be like, you know, these other fathers that I admire. Hopefully I think one of the biggest things I've learned of striving to be a good dad is just to be intentional, you know, about all the decisions that I make when I'm at home, what I'm doing, what I'm engaged with, how I'm listening, how I'm present, how I'm not present. And it can be a challenge, right? When you've got little people that have a lot of needs, and you've been working all day and have some interests of your own that don't necessarily align with their interests, and you've got to even at times set that aside and give them attention. It's hard.
For sure.
It's very hard.
For sure. I think we had discussed that at one point in time. You'd asked, like, what's it like to try and create the focus when maybe it's not something that you're interested in doing.
Yeah.
And I've found successes in blocking out time, making certain that I'm present, and to know that, like, my desire is really just to be around them, right? And so even if what they're doing isn't necessarily something that is directly of interest to me, I always feel like my life is better, or the situation is better, when they're around. I enjoy their presence. I enjoy being around them. I mean, as many parents can probably attest, there's unintended comedy often, you know, in kind of the craziest circumstance.
Nonstop.
And oftentimes the younger the better, right? But I just find that if I think I had mentioned that I create those boundaries, those bumper, like when you go bowling and your kids use those bumpers. I build that schedule. I use those bumpers.
Go ahead,
right. I build my schedule that way, you know, so that I can kind of live freely within those bumpers, but those bumpers keep the things that are most important in the forefront of my day. And so I don't recall who I heard this from, but it was, instead of prioritizing your schedule, it's schedule your priorities. And so if you schedule time with your kiddos, one of the commitments I made is that if my kiddos have the day off from school, no matter what, I will schedule on that day lunch to be able to take them to lunch. Just because it's a neat and easy thing, honestly. You know, look at how many times in business we move things around in order to schedule someone for lunch, right? That we have this interest in for whatever motivation, you know, whether it's a business motivation to get help or to help, or to work with someone. We'll oftentimes do what it takes to make certain that we can make room in our schedule. And so I think that from a priority standpoint, doing the same thing with your children, and that's just kind of one example, but if you build it into your schedule, then it'll happen. And most of us, I think salespeople and people that are busy in business with things tugging you in multiple different directions, I think that we live by a schedule. Like, if it's not on your schedule, it won't happen. And so think about the things, if you're not scheduling time with your kids, then it's likely that something could interrupt your best intention and take precedent, and all of a sudden that time's gone.
One of the things that I love what you said, and I've studied just recently what it takes to create a habit. And one of the ways that you create a habit is by identifying the cue that makes you do an activity that maybe you don't want to be doing. Maybe it's smoking, maybe it's whatever, like bad habit, right? And it's like, okay, what was the thing that caused me to want to do this bad habit? Now, if that's confusing in my audience, I actually don't smoke, but you get the point, right? But so you identify what's the cue that caused me to do this, and then you go back and you say, okay, I want to change that habit to this. So now I'm gonna put in a new cue. When this happens, then I do this. And so this habit of having lunch with your kids when they have the day off, you've made it a habit because you've said, when they have this, here's the cue, and here's what happens. It's not like, it'd be nice if we did this, and years go by.
Right.
And pretty soon they're old if they don't want to have lunch with you because you didn't spend the time early to build a relationship to where you don't really have that much in common. It's like, why would I want to have lunch with you, Dad? Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the great takeaways from what you just said. So thanks for sharing that. You can see really quickly why Tony really, in my opinion, is a true kind of expert when it comes to studying what fatherhood should look like. So good stuff. Let's talk a little bit about your kind of the unique circumstances your family's been through.
Yeah.
When you learned it within a few days of Isaac being born, that we've got a problem here, right?
Yeah.
Tell me kind of briefly about that.
So at 3 days old, the attending physician that kind of clears you to take your baby home couldn't find femoral pulses.
Right, so pulses down here. I remember them checking for that. And it was always kind of this weird, like, spread the legs.
They go through a couple different things, and impatient. I was impatient, and Isaac was getting flustered because he's got someone poking around all over him.
Right, he's mad anyway, right?
And my frustration started to elevate to the point where I'm like, seriously, just let us go home. What's the deal here? And
leave the kid alone.
And it kind of gave me this reflective moment that oftentimes I think that that type of impatience or frustration is just a symptom of ignorance, of not understanding really whatever circumstantially is going on to create that frustration. Because had I known that he was looking out for the best interest of my child, then I certainly would have been far more patient and not thought twice about it. But
great lesson in all areas of life, right? When you're irritated with someone else's actions, dig deeper to find out what's causing them to do this, and if you realize what they're doing, it might,
right. So in not finding those femoral pulses, we suddenly found ourselves following the ambulance up to Dornbecker's.
Wow.
They packed him in I think they took us to an echocardiogram. I had never heard that term prior to this. They did some testing, and the echo tech won't talk to you. They won't relay any kind of news. That's for doctors only. Yeah. But you could kind of sense concern. And then
kind of tension in the air of like, everything's not okay.
Right. And then the flurry of activity that resulted from that, obviously, then you're very aware that something's different than normal. And so we're chasing the ambulance up to the hill and to Dornbecker's, and all these doctors converge on Isaac, and a cardiologist took us into a room that was very sanitary. I felt like I was going to be interrogated. It was like fluorescent lights and very, very sanitary and doctorish. And he started to draw a picture of the heart and started teaching us things about the heart that I never cared to actually learn. But determined that there were a number of different factors contributing to some problems, some defects in his heart. And that's news that no parent ever wants to hear. And I think leading up to that, I just felt like I wasn't a new dad this time around. Isaac was our second, and I remember holding him the first night after he was born. I was feeding him middle of the night, and I remember praying, saying, I thank you. I just feel I'm so excited that I'm not a new dad. Because as you know, with your first child, at least for me, I knew nothing, and and felt like he was my oldest, that my firstborn, that he was so fragile, and took great care and worried about things that I probably didn't need to worry about, and this time around, I was like, man, I'm so thankful that I'm not a new dad. Like, I got this.
I got this figured out, man.
And boy, does God have a funny way of revealing to you that you don't.
Yeah.
And that was made aware on day 3. And so as the doctor's drawing these things out, I'm kind of a bottom line guy, and I was like, so what are we talking here? Because this is all foreign. Is this like, we have hours, we have days, we have weeks? What are we talking about here? And he said, it's going to be a process, but it's something that we can manage.
You remember saying at one point that you were grateful for his optimism? Because in that spot, right? I mean, the outlook wasn't joyful, right? It was like, this is going to be a battle,
right?
For quality of life, for life in period, right?
Right.
Yet he maintained an optimistic outlook, and I think maybe some lessons we can pull from that is, even as dads, we're now the leaders. We're the doctor, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And kids are constantly assessing our mood and how we're responding to things. And if little things blow us up, right, you can imagine what's the turmoil that's causing to them. But, I think the sign of a good leader, which really when we're talking about fatherhood, we're talking about leadership and love.
Yeah.
And
At the core.
Yeah. And it's being able to let people know that, hey, it's going to be fine. It's, that we've got, maybe some challenges ahead of us, but we got this.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think from there we had to wait 7 days in the hospital. There's a physiological thing that occurs after birth. So the pulmonary system, when the baby's in the womb, is dependent on a completely different system than after they're born, and it takes a number of days for that full conversion to take place. And there was a constriction of his aorta that they were kind of keeping their eyes on to see to what extent the constriction was causing the issues with the perfusion of his blood. And so if not detected, and if the constriction is severe enough, so back to day 3, if the doctor hadn't sensed that, there have been children that have gone home. They tend to have some issues, about day 7 or 8 when that full pulmonary system is in effect. And if they're not getting perfusion, then they can have organ failure and various things that are challenging. And so we had to wait 7 days. We were able to go home. But one of the symptoms of having a restricted blood flow and some of these other challenges with his heart is they kind of poop out easily. And so you don't think anything of it because babies sleep a lot anyway.
Right.
However, it impacts their ability to eat. They get tired out within literally minutes. And so for the first several months, it was round the clock feeding every hour.
Because you fall asleep at 1 or 2 ounces.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, fall asleep at 1 ounce and then be hungry,
right,
which would wake him up.
Yeah.
Roughly an hour later.
Jeez.
And so it was this kind of rotating around the clock. My wife and I traded off to try and maintain some semblance of normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
And they had said that we could take him home on a feeding tube, but we wanted as normal as possible for him.
Yeah.
So then at 5 weeks old, they brought us in, and now we're talking weekly trips up to Dornbecker's for tests. And so at 5 weeks, they said it's time we need to do some intervention. We're going to do a balloon angioplast to open up his aortic valve. So that was one of the other defects, was he had a aortic stenosis, which is a kind of a thickening of the aortic valve.
I gotta laugh real quick. My wife, who's a cardiovascular nurse, this may be the only episode or video of mine that she watches all the way to the end. And she's probably gonna afterwards say, now, why didn't you ask this? And why didn't you ask this?
Or I will certainly get something wrong. I'm happy to correct.
So this will be audited. I don't know it'll be corrected, but we might have some comments saying da-da-da-da. My wife might be reaching out tell me more. So,
right.
Anyway, carry on.
So they went in at 5 weeks old, tiny guy,
mm-hmm.
and put this thing down through the aorta, goes through the candy cane of the aorta into the aortic valve, and they blow up a balloon to open up that valve. And they came in after the procedure to show us what they had done. And he had 8.5 by 11 photos and I'm looking at this and marveling at the fact that this cord literally does a full 180 in the aorta. And I was curious as to why it wouldn't puncture. I just don't understand the insides as very well.
Yeah.
And then I actually had this thought where I was like, wait a minute, this is 8.5 by 11 picture. How big is his heart? And the doctor said the size of a walnut.
Wow.
Which made it even more fascinating.
Right.
That the miracle of medical technology enables, my son to still be alive, honestly.
Yeah.
So then that was a short-term success. At 8 months old, his first surgical procedure. This was more intervention. It wasn't considered surgery, although it feels like it. The first surgery was they went through his back and with a rib spreader opened up his ribs and they cut out the constriction of his aorta. And that resulted in his feeding doubling overnight.
Wow.
Which was dramatic.
Yeah.
Not only for him, but for us as parents.
Few hours sleep at a time.
It was very welcome. And, he started gaining some weight, and that was really positive. And then, the weekly checkups continued, and at 21 months old, they determined that it was time to do the first open heart surgery. And the objective in this particular surgery was there was a relatively new procedure, and they actually don't perform this procedure anymore, but they replace your aortic valve with your pulmonary valve. And then they replace your pulmonary valve with a cadaver valve, or they call it a conduit. And at that point in time, he went in at 21 months old, and the typical recovery time on a midline open heart surgery is about 8 to 10 days. And at day 9, he was actually declining pretty substantially, to the effect that it created kind of a in the middle of the night, early morning emergency procedure to drain his lungs, and it turned out that he had gotten a systemic infection. And
as if the surgery and everything wasn't enough trauma to the body, now we've got an infection and a...
Right. And at that age, it's hard to communicate to your child. It's also hard to get communication from your child, what hurts, what doesn't.
How old is he at this time again?
21 months, less than 2. And I had taken vacation to be there for the open heart surgery and the 9-day recovery. And on day 9, we find out he's got a systemic infection. And I said, how long is this going to take? Not knowing, again, somewhat ignorant to what was going on, that this was a really big deal. In fact, we found out later, at a later date, several years later, that the attending, she saw Isaac and was super happy to see him. And she said, Isaac was my first save. Which then
You're excited, but you dodged a bullet, right?
The magnitude of that statement, realizing that what we had gone through was far more risk and substantial in nature. We didn't really necessarily understand the gravity of it until then. Yeah. I mean, we were 60 days in the ICU. He was largely unconscious. He was addicted to morphine, had tons and tons and tons of other medications.
So from a father's perspective, what do you take away from that experience? I mean, how did you change as a father, and your role as a father, your perspective on fatherhood?
I was just going to say, it's perspective. I'll fast forward. So Isaac's 17 now, and has had a total of 4 open heart surgeries. There's likely to be another. We've had many other surgical procedures and complications, and even an emergency freak accident situation. He has a mechanical mitral valve. He has a pacemaker, and he's on blood thinners and a couple other medications. But the fast forward part was with my first child, and maybe some other dads can relate. My first son was very involved in sports, and we were very involved with him. And I feel like the perspective for me was, at that time, I was really hard on my older boy. Had high expectations.
Fanatical father, right?
Yeah. Hockey dad.
Yeah.
Although, I wasn't to that extreme, but I say that because...
Yelling at the coaches, at least internally, why isn't my son playing more?
Complaining, complaining to the coach, complaining to my son, honestly. We would drive home, and I was reliving the entire game for him on what he could have done better, and being another coach in his life, which was unnecessary. And at the end of the day, it's they're there to have a good time. They're there to have fun and play with others and have this team environment, and it's so positive that I look back and just am somewhat shamed, that it wasn't what it could have been. Because then Isaac, when he was in 5th grade, he wanted to do what little brother did, and he basically said, wanted to play basketball, and we went to his cardiologist, and the cardiologist is like, it's risky because it's still a contact sport. And with blood thinners, the concern is for head injuries. I always thought it was cuts, but it's more head injury, bruising, internal bleeding.
Internal bleeding.
Right. And so we talked with the coach. The coach assured us that she would pull him out at fourth period when it got full court and was a little bit more aggressive, and she would position him so that he was on the wing and that kind of stuff. So we felt relatively comfortable to let him play, that we would monitor and be there. And I remember seeing this boy, my son Isaac, all smiles, like a smile touching each earlobe, running up and down the court, simply excited to be able to be there.
Yeah.
To be able to do what his big brother did. And he would do this during practice, during games. He ended up getting,
right? I mean, it's just
man. And it was the perspective shift that I had at that point, as I looked at other parents being like I was, where my ego probably played out into my son's ability and performance, which is, I think that was what was driving the reasons why I expected more out of him. And when Isaac was there, my perspective was, how great is it that he's able to do this and put so much value and excitement in it, and is so happy to be there, even during the parts that all the other kids hated, which was the practice, right? And so, I realized it's like, none of these kids are going to the NBA. I mean, that's such a lottery pick, and yet here I was acting like it was my oldest. So that perspective of, like, let them have fun, let them learn to play with a team, let them learn direction from a coach that's actually making sacrifices to be there to teach your kids, and to not interject my feelings when I'm not there coaching and I'm not committing, my time and to that. And then the second thing was, in this real kind of big picture view, I felt like, we would treat Isaac as though he was more fragile than the other kids, than our other kids, almost to the extent that we would forget that all life is fragile and none of our days are guaranteed, and that if you have someone you love them. Like, don't wait, don't take it for granted,
or need a serious health concern to give them your full attention and love and support. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty dramatic, and I'm thankful for it. Like, as much as it was a challenge going through it, thankfully, as human beings, I feel like we soften some of the dark times in our life. But the perspective that was gained from it has been really impactful, and such that I don't want to miss a minute of any of my kids' lives. So I make it a point that if I see my kid's phone number come up, like on caller ID, if I have the ability to take the call, I absolutely commit to taking the call.
Top client. It's the most important client you
Exactly.
have. It's interesting how much being a father has taught me about life. I would say my spirituality gained an additional perspective when all of a sudden you have this child come into your life who you don't know, that immediately you love them. Like, there's me, like, I would give my life for that little blob of goo that just came out. It's like, I love that person. You realize that love is a gift, You also realize, like, what real love is like, you know?
Oh boy, in a big way.
Because that thing's done nothing for you, really,
Yeah.
And you've really done nothing for it, but there's this immediate bond, this connection. You realize that it's a much higher power that influences that. And my perspective on my relationship with my Heavenly Father got way deeper and different when I started to kind of contemplate what it meant to be a father, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, it's a cool way to, like, look at that role, that role that you play, but also the role that you're in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As a son.
Right.
Right. And I think that for being a dad of kiddos that, like you said, don't necessarily immediately have any type of value to give back, that is where you model true love, because as I had mentioned before, where you schedule this time in your schedule to be around them, to be with them, that to me is the love, because it's the most unselfish thing you could do, right? Because they're doing something they want to do, and you may not even like what they're doing, right?
It's so easier said than done. So the example that Tony's referencing is, I told him, I've got a son that's getting interested in video games, and I played a little bit as a kid, but I've never been a gamer, and I've got a son who gets more and more interested in it. He keeps wanting to teach me, how to play Roblox. And I'm like, I have zero interest in Roblox. And I can always say, get off the computer. And I'm getting to the point where it's not about what I want. It's about something. It's what he wants, right? And I'm not saying I'm going to give him free reign to do it whenever he wants.
Sure.
But to selflessly be interested in something because I'm interested in him, not because I'm interested in it.
100%. And they beam.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so cool to watch the immediate impact of time spent, right? And like, if you want the most convicting song there is, just listen to the words of the Cats in the Cradle.
Yeah.
I listened to that at an event where it was a mortgage-related event, and yet the person speaking was encouraging us to understand that there's life outside of business, and that there needs to be a balance. And man, when they played that song and we had the lyrics in front of us, it was so powerful, because that's where you find, like, your child will become the way that you were,
right?
And man, I didn't want to be that. And so I had a really, really interesting situation that came up that I'll try and keep from breaking down by telling it. But
break it down, man. Break it down.
So I would oftentimes, to try and avoid traffic, I would come home sometimes like early afternoon, and I would work out of my home office. And this one day, I come home, and Isaac was the only one home. The older and the younger were out playing or off doing something. And I come home, and Isaac's like, "Hey, Dad," and he's always like just positive, and it's really remarkable.
He's
like
amazing kid.
He's just such a neat personality. Always positive. And I come home, and he says, "Hey, Dad, you want to play catch?" And I was like, "Oh, buddy, after I'm done with a little bit of work, let's play catch." And so I go, I think I grabbed a glass of wine. It was like probably 3:30. I'm going to sit down in my office. And I knew I'm carrying my briefcase and a glass of wine into my home office. And I knew in the back of my mind, the second I sit down, it's gonna fast forward to dark, and it's gonna be an opportunity lost. And I don't know what was within me that said, I put my glass of wine down, never even opened my briefcase, and I said, "Buddy, let's go play catch." We went outside and played catch 30, 40 minutes. And and I wanted to go back when I said, "I got some work, buddy. Like, we'll do it later." He was always positive. "Okay, Dad." And the reason why I bring that up, because it kind of haunts me later. I played 30, 40, 50 minutes playing catch. We had a blast. He's not athletic by any stretch, but it was just time together. The next day, I get a phone call I was at a training, and he had a freak accident, shattered his kidney, because he was on blood thinners, was in critical condition, and that haunting feeling of, if I would have, because I didn't know at that point in time, and we didn't know for about the 6 days that he was in critical condition, whether or not he was going to make it. And the whole 6 days, and the 22 days that we were in the hospital, that just kept reoccurring in my mind. Like, what would have happened if I just would have been okay with the "Okay, Dad"?
Yeah. I've heard that love is spelled Time, and in our, I think one of the challenges of living in such a great country with so much opportunity is there's so much opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's literally endless amounts of opportunity and distraction as a result. And so I love the lessons that you've taught and shared about how to get those things in there most. Because at the end of the day, as we've talked about, even Steve Jobs, right, who's legendary, almost everything, right?
Yeah, right.
Business leader, innovator, marketer. On his deathbed, he had a regret, that he apologized to his daughter.
Yeah.
That he wasn't the dad that he wanted to be. And
it's so easy, and I don't know, I'm certain almost everyone can relate the put off, which I almost did.
Right.
"Hey, buddy, in a little bit."
Yeah.
And that little bit becomes the Disneyland vacation that you are going to do next year, or the family vacation that you're going to do next year, or the retirement planning that you're going to do next year, that then 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you're like,
Right.
I didn't get to it because I kept putting it off.
Yeah.
And that's the do it now more than anything, because it's the most critical.
Yeah.
And if we then schedule our priorities, you ensure that you do those things, because, man, I can't imagine, there's always going to be some level of regret in life.
Over something, right? Yeah.
But I don't want it to be about my kids.
Yes. And the ripple effect of putting them first, it's not just that you won't have the regrets, right? It's that their life's different and the impact of them can be different. It just has this amazing impact on your life and the lives of potentially so many others.
Yeah.
Fortunate for you and your family, you reverse that trend, right?
Yeah.
And we're able to now send the message to your family what that can look like, right? As a very intentional, loving father.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate. I think my mom was the one that instilled that in me, and it's been a unique experience for me, because I was the same age when I had my first child as my mom was when she had me. So I can reflect back on how I was feeling at various times. Like, for example, when my son moved out, it was easy for me to wonder or to contemplate how my mom must have felt, because I was feeling that. I was the same age she was when I moved out.
Wow.
As when my son moved out.
Yeah.
And so it's been this kind of interesting dynamic of being able to live through what my parent was experiencing as my child is experiencing it.
Yeah, it's an odd experience when you realize, like, I remember when my mom or dad were this age, and
Yes.
they seemed really
Old?
Yeah.
True.
It's like,
Very
wait,
true.
I'm that now? So,
And
anyway.
that's just the kind of awareness that time absolutely flies.
Yeah.
We say it, we hear it,
Yeah.
but the live it part, like, make certain that you don't let it fly at the expense of the things that are most important.
Yeah, with it also being Father's Day, it's also graduation week, or it was last week, and so many people look at me who, my kids are really young, and they say, don't blink, it goes so fast.
Yes.
Live it up, enjoy
Yeah.
it, soak it up. So hopefully this has inspired all of us to really realize what relationships are most important in life. Maybe you aren't blessed with children, maybe you've got nieces and nephews, maybe you've got whatever that may look like for you. My hope from this Think Bigger Mastermind is you think a little bit bigger about those relationships that matter the most, that cause you to do something different. I think time blocking those things first is critical, and then hopefully have allow that to then have a massive impact in your life, which is of course the mission that I'm on, is that series to happen in people's lives. So special thanks to you, Tony, for being here.
My pleasure.
Sharing your passion.
My favorite topic.
I know, right? In fact, we got you to talk about it a couple times.
Yeah.
By design.
That's the blooper reel.
Right. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. And please, I would invite you, if this episode was helpful, please share it. I would also invite you to subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes that help you to think bigger about things that can really have a big impact upon your world and the world in general. So thanks again, man. Appreciate you.
You bet. Appreciate it.
Yep. I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Think Bigger Mastermind with me, your host, Justin Stoddard. Now, here's how you can show me some digital love in return. Number 1, subscribe to the show. Number 2, give me a review. And number 3, go think bigger.